They say blood is thicker than water, that the bond between a father and son is unbreakable. For 68 years, I believed that. I built an empire with my own two hands, not for myself, but for him, for my family. I thought I was leaving behind a legacy. I never imagined they'd try to bury me before I was even dead. They saw my gray hair and my slow steps and thought I was a relic, a piece of furniture to be moved into a home and forgotten. They misjudged me. They forgot that the quietest lions are often the most dangerous. This isn't just a story about a house. It's about what happens when you push a man who has nothing left to lose but his memories. The silence in a house that was once filled with laughter is a specific kind of torment. It's not an absence of sound, it's a presence of absence. Every creak of the floorboards is a ghost. Every whisper of the wind through the eaves is a memory. My house, the one people in our town called the Vance Estate, was more than just brick and mortar. It was a cathedral of my life, and its halls held the echoes of the only saint I ever knew. My late wife, Eleanor. We built it together, from the first sketch on a diner napkin to the final brass handle on the grand oak doors. I was a young man then, with more ambition than sense and calluses on my hands from laying foundations for other people's dreams. One day, Ellie, I'd tell her, I'll build you a house with a garden so beautiful the angels will get jealous. And I did. I founded Vance Construction, and brick by brick, deal by deal, I built an empire. The house on Blackwood Lane was the jewel in that crown, our fortress of solitude and love. Every inch of that place was infused with her. The bay window in the kitchen, where she'd sit with her morning tea, the sunlight making a halo of her silvering hair, the worn spot on the Persian rug in the library, where her favorite armchair used to be, the faint scent of lavender that, even 5 years after she was gone, still clung to the curtains in our bedroom. To me, that house wasn't an asset. It wasn't real estate. It was the last living piece of her I had left. After she passed, the silence grew louder. I was 73, and the world had started to feel like a foreign country. My son Michael and his wife Tiffany began to visit more often. At first, I was grateful. The house felt less empty with them and my two grandchildren, Lily and Noah, running through the halls. Their laughter was a balm on a wound I thought would never heal. Michael was my only child, my heir. I'd given him everything. The best schools, a vintage Mustang for his 16th birthday, a cushy executive position at Vance Construction that he didn't have to work too hard for. I loved him, but I wasn't blind. He had my name, but not my grit. He'd inherited my wallet, but not my work ethic. His wife, Tiffany, was another creature entirely. She was polished, beautiful, and had an insatiable appetite for the finer things in life. She dripped in designer labels and spoke of vacations in Monaco and St. Bart's as if they were trips to the local grocery store. She treated me with a kind of cloying, condescending sweetness that always set my teeth on edge. She called me Pops and would pat my hand, her perfectly manicured nails a stark contrast to my age-spotted skin. "Oh, Pops, you shouldn't be rattling around in this huge place all by yourself," she'd say, her voice dripping with faux concern. "It's just too much for you." Their visits started as weekend affairs, then stretched into long weekends. Soon they were leaving things behind. A toothbrush in the guest bathroom, a spare suit for Michael in a closet, Tiffany's expensive skin creams colonizing the marble countertop of Eleanor's vanity. They were like vines, slowly, almost imperceptibly, creeping over the walls of my life, choking out the light. I was lonely and I mistook their encroachment for care. That was my first and most foolish mistake. The campaign began subtly. It was a war of whispers, of gentle suggestions and feigned worry. It started with my driving. "Dad, are you sure you should be driving at night?" Michael asked one evening, taking my keys from the hook by the door. "Your eyes aren't what they used to be. Let me drive you to your poker game." I'd been driving for over 50 years without a single accident, but I relented. It seemed like a small thing, a son looking out for his father. Then it was the finances. "Pops, you got a letter from the bank," Tiffany said, holding a bill aloft with 2 fingers as if it were contaminated. "It seems you forgot to pay the property tax installment. Don't you worry your sweet head about it. Michael and I will set up automatic payments. We should probably get our names on the accounts. just to help you manage things. It can all get so confusing, can't it? I knew for a fact I had paid that bill. I had a ledger in my study where I recorded every single expenditure, a habit from my leaner days. But when I went to find the checkbook stub, the entire book was missing. You probably misplaced it, Dad, Michael said with a sigh. It happens. They were painting a picture of me as a doddering old fool, a man whose mind was fading as fast as his hairline. They did it so skillfully with such loving smiles and concerned tones that at times I almost started to believe them myself. Did I forget to pay that bill? Was my eyesight getting worse? The constant suggestion plants a seed of doubt that, in the fertile ground of grief and loneliness, can grow into a tree of insecurity. The next front in their quiet war was the house itself. "This place is a money pit, Pops," Tiffany would say, running a finger over a dusty mantelpiece. "The heating bills must be astronomical. And the stairs. I worry sick about you on these stairs." They started helping me. One weekend I came home from a walk to find a team of their designer's assistants in my library. They were packing Eleanor's books into boxes. "What in God's name is going on here?" I thundered, my voice echoing in the suddenly cavernous feeling room. Tiffany rushed over, a brilliant, false smile plastered on her face. "Pops, we wanted to surprise you. We're updating the room, making it more modern, more comfortable for you. Less clutter." Clutter? I picked up a well-worn copy of Wuthering Heights, Eleanor's favorite. Her notes were in the margins. "This isn't clutter. This is my wife. This is our life." "Of course it is, and we'll keep all the important things," she said, patting my arm again. "We're just creating a more streamlined living space for you. Michael and I have been talking. We think it's time we moved in, permanently, to take care of you." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. That was their endgame. Not just to visit, not just to help, but to occupy, to take over. Michael stood in the doorway, unable to meet my eyes, a silent, complicit partner in his wife's meticulous coup. "This is still my house," I said, my voice dangerously low. "And we want to keep it that way, Dad," Michael finally chimed in, his voice placating. "We want to keep you here, in your home, but you need us. It's for the best." They saw the house not as a home, but as a prize, an inheritance they were too impatient to wait for. And they saw me as the inconvenient, doddering dragon guarding the treasure, a dragon they could lull to sleep with sweet words and slow poison. They thought the fire in my belly was long gone. They were about to learn that embers can reignite into an inferno. The mask of concern slipped permanently a few weeks later. It was a Tuesday. I remember the oppressive humidity of that late August afternoon. I was supposed to be napping, a new routine they had insisted upon for my health. Of course, I couldn't sleep. I was lying in bed, the silence of the house pressing down on me, when I heard Tiffany's voice from the hallway. She was on her phone, and her voice was no longer the syrupy, sweet tone she used with me. It was sharp, cold, and contemptuous. "No, he's sleeping. Like he always is," she said, followed by a short, bitter laugh. "Honestly, Brenda, it's like living with a ghost who doesn't know he's dead yet." I know. Patience. But my patience is wearing thin. We've got the power of attorney paperwork drafted. Michael's lawyer friend says if we can just get him to sign it, we can streamline everything. My blood ran cold. Power of attorney, the legal document that would effectively hand them control over my entire life's work, my company, my savings, my house. Her voice dropped a little, but I could still hear her clearly. "Once that's signed, we can move him into that lovely place, the Willows. It's top of the line. He'll have a garden view and everything. He won't even notice the difference. Then we can finally sell this mausoleum. The realtor, a friend of mine, Robert Mills from Sterling Properties, said we could easily get $3 million for it, maybe more, if we clear out all this old junk. We'll be set. Michael can finally quit pretending to care about his father's dusty construction business, and we can live properly." A wave of icy fury washed over me, so potent it left me breathless. It wasn't just about the money or the house. It was the sheer, breathtaking disrespect, the utter contempt. This old junk, a ghost who doesn't know he's dead. They weren't trying to care for me. They were trying to erase me. They were vultures circling, waiting for me to take my last breath, and they had gotten tired of waiting. I lay there for a full hour after she hung up, my heart hammering against my ribs. The grief I felt was profound, a different, sharper grief than the one I felt for Eleanor. This was the death of the son I thought I knew. The Michael who used to follow me around construction sites with a little yellow hard hat was gone. In his place was a hollow man, a puppet for his greedy wife. The sadness came first, a deep, crushing weight. Then something else began to bubble up from the depths of my soul, the old, familiar fire, the grit that had turned a penniless young man into a titan of industry, the stubbornness that had seen me through recessions, betrayals, and hardships. They thought I was a feeble old man. Fine, I would be the most feeble, most forgetful, most pliable old man they had ever seen. If they wanted to see a ghost, I would haunt them in ways they could never imagine. That night at dinner, I played my part. I accidentally called Tiffany Eleanor. The look of triumph in her eyes was sickening. I spilled my soup. I asked the same question 3 times. "Dad, Tiffany and I have some papers we need you to look at," Michael said, sliding a thick folder across the mahogany dining table. "It's just some estate planning to make things easier down the line." I squinted at the documents, pretending to struggle with the words. Power of attorney, that sounds important. My lawyer, Samuel Jones, always told me to be careful with these things. "Oh, Pops, lawyers just complicate things and charge a fortune," Tiffany cooed. "This is just family. We'll take care of you. You can trust us." "Of course, dear," I said, giving her a weak, watery smile. "Of course I trust you. Let me think on it. My mind is a bit foggy today." I pushed the folder back. I needed to buy time. My mind wasn't foggy. It was crystal clear. It was a chessboard, and I had just seen their entire strategy. Now it was my turn to make a move. The next morning, I made the most important phone call of my life. I used the old, dusty landline in my study, a phone they probably thought was just a decoration. I dialed a number I knew by heart. Samuel Jones, attorney at law. The voice on the other end was as steady and reliable as it had been for the last 40 years. Sam wasn't just my lawyer, he was my oldest friend. We'd gotten into our fair share of scrapes as kids, and he'd helped me navigate the legal minefields of my business for decades. "Sam, it's Arthur," I said, my voice low. "Art, good to hear from you. How are you holding up? Michael tells me you've been a bit under the weather." So the narrative was already being spread. "I'm clearer than I've been in years, Sam, but I need your help, and I need absolute discretion. Michael and his wife, they're not to know about this call." There was a pause. Sam was sharp. He could read between the lines better than anyone. "I see. What's going on, old friend?" I told him everything. The whispers, the help, the missing checkbook, the overheard phone call about the Willows and selling the house. I told him about the power of attorney papers sitting on my desk. By the time I finished, the only sound on the line was Sam's heavy breathing. "That ungrateful little," he began but cut himself off. "Arthur, I am so sorry. So what's the plan? We can fight this. We can get a restraining order. We can contest any move they make." "No," I said firmly. "A public fight is what they want. It would be messy and they'd paint me as a confused old man lashing out. They would use my age against me, bring in doctors to question my competency. No, we are not going to fight them. We are going to let them win. We're going to let them think they've won." "What are you talking about, Art?" "I'm going to play the part they've written for me, Sam. I will be confused. I will be frail. I will be the doddering old fool they think I am. And while they're busy patting themselves on the back, you and I are going to sell the house right out from under them." The silence on the other end was so long, I thought we'd been disconnected. Then a slow chuckle. "Arthur Vance, you magnificent old bastard. You haven't lost a step. Okay, I'm in. What do you need?" "First, I need you to find me a buyer, a private buyer. No for sale sign on the lawn, no online listing. This has to be completely off market, and the buyer has to be willing to close fast and with zero contingencies." "That's a tall order for a property of that value," Sam warned. "I know, but here's the kicker, Sam. I don't care about the price. They think it's worth $3 million. I'll take less. I'll take $2.8 million. I just want it sold, And I want the proceeds handled in a very specific way. I laid out the rest of my plan. It was audacious, it was ruthless, and it was theatrical. It was perfect. Sam listened, his occasional grunts of approval turning into full-blown admiration by the end. "I'll make some calls," he said, his voice buzzing with energy. "I know a few people who value privacy. And Art, be careful." "Don't worry about me, Sam," I said, looking at the power of attorney folder on my desk. "The ghost is about to get busy. For the next 6 weeks, I gave the performance of a lifetime. I became the man they wanted me to be. I signed the power of attorney papers, but only after accidentally spilling coffee on the first copy, forcing Michael to have them redrafted, buying Sam another precious week. I let Tiffany redecorate the living room in a sterile palette of gray and beige, nodding vacantly as she explained how calming it was. She stripped the walls of photos of Eleanor and me, replacing them with abstract art that looked like a paint factory had exploded. I didn't say a word. I let them take over my finances, watching with internal amusement as Michael struggled to understand the portfolio I'd built over 50 years. He made a few clumsy, ill-advised trades, losing a not insignificant amount of money, which he then tried to hide from me. All the while, Sam was working in the shadows. He found a buyer. It was a cash offer, quick and clean. The buyer was a nonprofit organization looking to establish a new local headquarters. The name of the organization was the cherry on top, a piece of poetic justice that made me weep when Sam told me. They were called the Eleanor Foundation for Community Arts, a charity founded in another state, dedicated to funding arts programs for underprivileged children. Eleanor's greatest passion. They had no idea of the connection. To them, it was just a suitable property. To me, it was a sign. We set a closing date. The paperwork was drawn up. Everything was done through Sam's office, electronically and with the utmost secrecy. All I had to do was wait for the perfect moment to lower the boom. And I knew with a grim certainty that Michael and Tiffany would provide it for me. The weeks leading up to the closing were a masterclass in psychological torment, though I was the only one who knew it. I watched my son and his wife finalize their plans with the smug satisfaction of predators who have successfully cornered their prey. They were so confident, so utterly sure of their victory that they became sloppy. They started talking openly in front of me, assuming I either couldn't hear or wouldn't understand. I'd be sitting in my armchair pretending to doze, while Tiffany discussed paint swatches for the master suite with a decorator on the phone. Michael would walk through the study, my study, talking about turning it into a home gym with a killer sound system. They were carving up my life before I was even gone, dividing the spoils while the body was still warm. My grandchildren, Lily and Noah, were my only source of pain in this whole charade. They were sweet kids and they were being poisoned by their parents' greed. "Grandpa, Mommy says we're going to live here soon, and my room will be the big one with the balcony," Lily told me one afternoon. I just smiled and told her that would be lovely, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. What was I supposed to say? That her parents were trying to steal my home and discard me like a piece of trash? The breaking point, the final insult that cemented my resolve, came about a week before the closing. I overheard Tiffany talking to her friend Robert Mills, the realtor. "Yes, Robbie. The Willows is all lined up," she said, her voice bright and cheerful. "We've put down a deposit, a lovely little room. He'll be moved in by the end of the month. We just need to wait for him to, sign the final admission forms. We're telling him it's a respite care stay, just for a few weeks while the house is being renovated." A respite care stay. They were going to trick me into a nursing home. They were going to drop me off with a suitcase and a pat on the head and never come back. That night I called Sam. "It's time," I said. "The closing is set for next Friday, correct?" "Correct. 10 a.m. The funds will be transferred by noon." "Good," I said. "Then I think my respite care stay should begin next weekend." Sam understood immediately. "You want them to make their move?" "I want them to walk right into the trap," I confirmed. "I want them to be so high on their victory that the fall is as far as possible." The final week was agonizing. I packed. Not the way they thought I would, with a small suitcase for my respite stay. I packed my entire life. Late at night, after they had gone to their own home, my house would come alive. Movers, vetted and hired by Sam, came in the dead of night. They were quiet, professional, like a team of ghosts. We packed Eleanor's books, my old records, the photo albums, the little trinkets and treasures that made the house a home. Everything was moved to a secure storage facility Sam had arranged. The house was slowly hollowed out, but in a way that wasn't immediately obvious. The big furniture remained, but the soul was being systematically extracted. I left a few of my old suits in the closet, a few toiletries in the bathroom, the perfect stage dressing for the final act. On Thursday, the day before the closing, I signed the final transfer documents in Sam's office. My hand was steady. My mind was clear. When I returned home, Michael and Tiffany were waiting for me, their faces radiating a predatory warmth. "Dad, we have such wonderful news," Michael announced, practically bouncing on the balls of his feet. "We've booked you a little vacation," Tiffany chimed in. "A beautiful place called The Willows. Just for a couple of weeks. They have a pool, activities. You'll love it. It'll give you a chance to rest while we oversee some much-needed renovations here." "Renovations?" I asked, playing my part. "What kind of renovations?" "Oh, just updating the wiring, a little plumbing," Michael said dismissively. "Boring stuff. We'll handle everything. We'll take you there on Saturday morning." "That sounds nice," I said with a weary sigh. I could see the finish line. They thought it was theirs. The next day, Friday, was the longest day of my life. I knew that at 10 a.m., a transaction was occurring in a downtown office that was changing the course of all our lives. At 12:05 p.m., I received a simple text message from Sam. "It is done. The eagle has left the nest. The house was no longer mine. The $2.8 million minus taxes and fees was now in a trust account, the sole beneficiary of which was the Eleanor Foundation for Community Arts. My legacy was secure. My wife's memory was honored. All that was left was the final curtain call, and it came right on schedule that very evening. They arrived around 7 p.m. on Friday, their faces flushed with a triumphant glee they could no longer conceal. They brought pizza, as if this were some joyous family celebration. The scent of pepperoni and cheap cheese felt like a desecration in the house that had hosted decades of Eleanor's masterful cooking. They pranced around, talking about their plans, believing I was their oblivious, senile captive. Michael draped his arm over my shoulder. It felt heavy, proprietary. "Big day tomorrow, Dad," he said, his voice thick with fake sentiment. "The start of a new chapter for all of us." "We've already started packing up some of our things at the apartment," Tiffany added, gesturing vaguely with a slice of pizza. "We've got the moving truck scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp. We'll get you settled at the Willows, and then the movers will bring our stuff over. We figure we can be all moved in by tomorrow night." "We're moving in tomorrow, Dad." There it was, the line, the culmination of months of their deceit and greed, delivered with a smug, self-satisfied smile. They expected me to nod, to smile weakly, to shuffle off to my doom. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment I had replayed in my mind 1,000 times. I didn't answer right away. I slowly, deliberately dabbed my lips with a napkin. I took a slow sip of water. I let the silence stretch, letting their triumphant smiles falter just a little, replaced by a flicker of confusion. I looked from my son's face to his wife's, seeing them not as family, but as what they were, strangers with familiar features. Then I smiled. It wasn't a weak, senile smile. It was the smile I used to give a competitor right before I drove them out of business. It was a smile as sharp and cold as a shard of glass. It did not reach my eyes. "Moving in," I said, my voice perfectly calm, devoid of the quavering weakness I had been affecting for months. "That's going to be a problem." The change in my demeanor was so abrupt it was like a bucket of ice water had been thrown on them. Tiffany's smile vanished. Michael's arm slipped from my shoulder. "What do you mean, Dad?" Michael asked, a note of caution in his voice. "We've discussed this." "No," I said, leaning forward slightly. "You've informed me. There's a difference." I reached into the inside pocket of the jacket I had purposefully worn for this occasion. I pulled out a folded sheaf of documents. It was a copy of the finalized sale contract. I smoothed it out on the table, right next to the greasy pizza box, The crisp official paper, a stark contrast to the casual mess they had made. I pushed it across the table towards Michael. I smiled and handed him the 2.8-match sale contract. He stared at it, confused. "What is this?" "Read it," I said. He picked it up, Tiffany leaning over his shoulder, her brow furrowed in annoyance. I watched their eyes scan the first page. I saw the exact moment the words registered. Michael's face went slack, the color draining from it as if a plug had been pulled. Tiffany's perfectly made-up face contorted, first in disbelief, then in pure, unadulterated rage. "Sale contract?" she hissed, snatching the papers from Michael's limp grasp. "What is this joke, Arthur?" The pops was gone. "It's no joke, once," I said, my voice as even as a granite slab. "This house was sold. The closing was at 10 o'clock this morning. The funds have been transferred. The deed is no longer in my name. You see, while you were picking out your new paint colors and finding a place to dump me, I was a little busy myself." You can't have," Michael stammered, shaking his head. "The power of attorney. We have. The power of attorney you have is for my personal and financial affairs, which as of noon today no longer include this property. I signed the preliminary sale agreement 6 weeks ago before I ever put my signature on your treacherous little document. My lawyer is very thorough." Tiffany frantically flipped through the pages. $2.8 million? You sold it for under market value? To whom? Who is the Eleanor Foundation for Community Arts? "A wonderful charity," I said, the first genuine smile of the evening gracing my lips. "They fund art programs for children. Eleanor would have loved it, and that money, every last cent of it, is now safely in a trust for their benefit. It's already been transferred. It's gone." The reality of my words slammed into them. The house was gone. The money was gone. Their entire parasitic plan had been built on a foundation I had secretly bulldozed. "How?" Michael whispered, his face pale with shock. "How could you do this to us? To your family?" "Family." I finally let the cold fury I had suppressed for so long seep into my voice. "You talk to me about family?" "I heard you, Tiffany. On the phone. Planning to put me in the willows. Talking about selling my old junk. A ghost who doesn't know he's dead yet? Well, this ghost just learned a new trick." I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. I was no longer a frail old man. I was Arthur Vance, the man who built an empire from dirt and sweat, and they had reminded me of that fact. "The new owners have been gracious enough to allow me to remain on the premises for 48 hours to oversee the removal of my remaining personal effects. You, however, are trespassing. I want you out of my wife's house. Now." Tiffany's face was a mask of hatred. "You miserable old man," she spat. "You would burn it all down rather than let your own son have his inheritance?" "He was going to have his inheritance," I said, my gaze locking onto Michael, who wouldn't look at me. "He was going to have all of it. But an inheritance is meant to be received upon a person's death, not hastened by it. You didn't want an inheritance. You wanted a robbery. You just weren't smart enough to check if the vault was already empty." I walked to the front door and opened it wide, letting the cool night air rush in. "Get out!" They stood frozen for a moment, the half-eaten pizza and their shattered dreams lying on my dining room table. Then, with a strangled cry of rage, Tiffany threw the remaining contract pages to the floor and stormed out. Michael followed, a broken, shuffling figure, not once turning to look at me. As I closed the door on my only son, the silence that flooded the house was different. It wasn't the silence of absence anymore. It was the silence of victory. But as the adrenaline began to fade, I found that it was the loneliest sound I had ever heard. I thought that night would bring a sense of profound relief, of justice served. For a few fleeting moments, after I closed the solid oak door on the remnants of my family, it did. The adrenaline coursed through my veins like a forgotten drug, a potent cocktail of vindication and power. I had won. The word echoed in the sudden, immense silence of the grand foyer. I walked back to the dining room and surveyed the scene. A half-eaten pizza sat cooling in its greasy cardboard box, a pathetic monument to my son's failed coup. The discarded contract pages lay scattered on the floor like fallen leaves. I had protected my castle, repelled the invaders, but victory is a funny thing. It's a bright, blinding flash, and once your eyes adjust, you have to see what's left in the aftermath. As the minutes turned into an hour, the triumphant pounding in my chest began to subside, replaced by a hollow, aching thrum. The silence I had craved, the silence free of their whispers and plotting, was now a physical presence. It was heavier than before, suffocating. It was no longer the silence of Eleanor's absence. It was the silence of my own making, a vacuum I had created by blasting my own world apart. I poured myself a glass of the good scotch, the 25-year-old Macallan I saved for special occasions. I had imagined this moment, this celebratory drink. I raised the crystal tumbler, the amber liquid catching the light. A toast to what? To victory? To being alone? The first sip, which should have been smooth and warming, tasted like ash and regret. It burned on its way down. I set the glass aside, untouched. Restless, I began to walk through the house. My house for just 2 more days. I was a king surveying a kingdom I had just abdicated. I ran my hand along the cool marble of the fireplace in the living room, the space where Tiffany's sterile gray couch now sat, an ugly scar on the memory of the warm, chintz sofa Eleanor and I had chosen together. I climbed the grand staircase, my footsteps echoing unnaturally. In the master bedroom, I stood before the bay window where my wife used to watch the sunrise. The new owners, the foundation, had asked if they could keep her garden as it was, a memorial. I had agreed. It was the one piece of my plan that felt purely good, untainted by the bile of my revenge. But looking out at it now, I felt a pang of such profound loss, it nearly buckled my knees. I had saved her garden, but salted the earth of my own lineage. Sleep did not come that night. I sat in the dark, a ghost in a house of ghosts, listening to the sounds of my choices settling into the foundations. What had I truly accomplished? I had proven I was not a feeble old man. I had proven I was smarter, more ruthless. I had punished betrayal. But as I saw Michael's pale, shocked face in my mind's eye, his stammered, "How could you do this to us?" A question wormed its way into my heart. Was there another way? Could I have sold the house and simply walked away, leaving them to their confusion? Yes, but it wouldn't have been enough. I hadn't just wanted to escape. I had wanted to watch them fall. I had wanted them to feel the sting of utter humiliation. And that desire, I realized in the lonely dark, was a poison I had willingly drunk, expecting only them to die. The next morning, the movers arrived. They were the same quiet professional crew Sam had hired before. Their efficiency was brutal. They dismantled the last vestiges of my life with a detached calm that felt almost violent. I watched as they wrapped my armchair, the one I'd sat in for my final confrontation, in plastic sheeting, mummifying it. I stood aside as they carried out the last box of my files from the study. With each item that crossed the threshold, the house felt less like mine and more like a stage after the play has ended. By late afternoon, it was done. The lead mover, a stocky man with kind eyes, handed me a clipboard. "That's the last of it, Mr. Vance. If you'll just sign here." I signed my name, my hand steady. "Where to now?" he asked, making small talk. "An apartment downtown," I said. The words felt foreign, like a line from someone else's script. He nodded. "Well, good luck, sir. It's a beautiful place. Must be hard to leave." "Harder than you know," I replied, my voice a hoarse whisper. I did one final walkthrough. The rooms were cavernous, their grandeur naked and imposing, without the furniture and life that had filled them. Sunlight streamed through the clean windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The echoes were different now. I couldn't hear Eleanor's laughter anymore. I could only hear the screech of my chair as I stood up to banish my son. I could hear the rustle of the contract pages. I could hear the final definitive click of the door I had closed on him. I walked out the front door and didn't look back. I couldn't. I closed it behind me, and the sound of the heavy lock catching was the sound of a mausoleum being sealed. My legacy was inside, preserved and perfect, and I was outside in the cold. The first week in the new apartment was a lesson in anonymity. I was no longer Arthur Vance of the Vance estate. I was just the old man in 4B. The building was clean and quiet, populated by young professionals who came and went like specters, their faces buried in their phones. The walls were thin. I could hear the muffled sounds of their lives, music, arguments, laughter, while my own apartment remained as silent as a tomb. I expected a phone call, an angry, screaming tirade from Tiffany, a tearful, pleading call from Michael, a threatening letter from a lawyer, anything, but there was nothing. The silence from their end was absolute and, frankly, unnerving. My son was not a man of stoic resolve. His silence was not a sign of strength. It was a sign that something was wrong. After 10 days of this gnawing quiet, a flicker of something, guilt, or perhaps the stubborn, vestigial remnant of fatherly concern, compelled me to act. I called Michael's cell phone. It rang and rang before clicking to a generic, automated voicemail message. He hadn't even bothered to record his own name. I didn't leave a message. I called again the next day. Same result. I called his office at Vance Construction, the company I had built for him. Vance Construction, this is Sarah, a cheerful voice answered. Hello, Sarah. It's Arthur Vance. Could I speak to Michael, please? There was a sudden, awkward pause. Oh, Mr. Vance. Sir, Michael hasn't been in all week. We thought he was with you. No, he isn't, I said, a cold dread beginning to seep into my bones. Has his wife called? No, sir. We've tried to reach them both. No one's answering. Is everything all right? I'm sure it's fine, I lied, the words tasting like metal. Thank you, Sarah. I hung up the phone, my heart hammering. This was not right. Their fury should have been immediate and loud. This silent vanishing act was something else entirely. The answer arrived 2 days later. It wasn't a call from Michael or Tiffany. It was from a woman with a calm, clinical voice who identified herself as a social worker from St. Jude's Hospital. Am I speaking with Mr. Arthur Vance, the father of Michael Vance? She asked. Yes, I said, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. Is he all right? Mr. Vance, your son was brought into our care yesterday evening. He was found by the state police in his vehicle on an access road off the interstate. He was unresponsive, not physically harmed, but in a state of extreme psychological distress. I sank into a chair, the world tilting slightly on its axis. What does that mean? He's been admitted to our psychiatric ward, she said, her professional tone offering no comfort. The doctor's preliminary diagnosis is an acute psychotic break, brought on by what appears to be a significant emotional trauma. He is currently in a near catatonic state. He is not speaking. We found your number listed as his next of kin in his wallet. The clinical words were like stones, each one striking me with a dull, heavy impact. Psychotic break. Catatonic. My son. His wife, Tiffany, I managed to ask. That's partly why I'm calling, the social worker continued, her voice softening with a hint of pity. In situations like this, we try to piece together the precipitating events. We spoke with the neighbors at their apartment complex. Apparently, there was a major disturbance about 2 weeks ago. Shouting, things breaking. One neighbor heard Mrs. Vance screaming something about him having lost everything. The following morning, she was seen leaving with the children and several suitcases. She hasn't been seen since. She seems to have cleaned out their bank accounts. As far as we can tell, Mr. Vance, your son has been alone in that apartment for nearly 2 weeks, and it appears he has not been coping. My clever plan, my perfect theatrical revenge. I had intended to shear the sheep, to take back what was mine and leave them embarrassed. Instead, I had skinned him alive and left him for dead on the side of the road. I went to the hospital that afternoon. It was a sterile place of hushed voices and the smell of antiseptic. A weary-looking doctor with kind eyes explained Michael's condition to me. His mind has essentially shut down to protect itself from a trauma it couldn't process, he explained. Abandonment, a major financial shock. A combination like that can be a powerful trigger. Was there a recent, significant stressor in his life, Mr. Vance? The question was a scalpel, laid gently against my conscience. Yes, I said, the word barely a whisper. There was. He didn't press. He didn't have to. He just nodded and led me down a hallway to a locked ward. He's not taking visitors in his room yet, but you can see him through the window. And there he was, my son. He was sitting on the edge of a narrow bed, wearing pale blue hospital pajamas that hung off his frame. He was thinner, his face gaunt and unshaven, but it was his eyes that shattered me. They were empty. He was staring at the blank, beige wall with an unfocused gaze that saw nothing. He wasn't my conniving, weak-willed son anymore. He was the little boy who used to run to me with scraped knees, his face crumpled in pain, seeking comfort he knew I would provide. I stood there on the other side of a thick pane of reinforced glass, and I had never felt so helpless. My righteous anger was gone, burned away by a grief so profound it felt like I was drowning. I had done this. My victory was a man in a locked room, staring at a wall. The final piece of karma, the one that sealed my fate, arrived the following week. Desperate for any connection, for my grandchildren, I found the phone number for Tiffany's parents in an old address book. Her mother answered. When I identified myself, the line went cold. "You have done enough damage to this family, Arthur," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "Do not ever call this number again." The line went dead. A few days later, a long white envelope arrived. It was from a prestigious law firm. Inside, a letter detailed in cold legal prose that their client, Tiffany Vance, had filed for sole custody of her children, citing spousal abandonment and the profoundly toxic and destabilizing influence of Michael's family, namely me. It included a formal cease and desist order, forbidding me from making any attempt to contact her or my grandchildren, Lily and Noah. Any attempt to do so would be met with a restraining order. My name, Arthur Vance, was now a legal weapon being used to sever me from the only true legacy I had left. I sit here now in this quiet apartment, a prisoner of my own success. The Vance estate is now the Eleanor Center for Community Arts. I drove by it once. It was a sunny afternoon, and the grounds were filled with children. I could hear their laughter, the faint sound of a piano being played through an open window. It is a beautiful tribute, a perfect memorial. Everything Eleanor would have wanted. But I am a stranger looking through the gates, a ghost haunting the edges of a life I created and then destroyed. Was it worth it? I ask myself that every morning when I wake up in the oppressive silence, and every night before I fall into a restless, dreamless sleep. I saved a building, I honored a memory, but I lost a son and sacrificed my grandchildren. They tried to make me a ghost in my own home. They failed. But my revenge in its flawless, brutal execution succeeded where they could not. I am now a ghost in my own life, forever rattling the chains of a victory that cost me everything. So that's my story. It's a cautionary tale, I suppose. A story about how quickly family can turn and the terrible price of pride and vengeance. I won by every definition of the word. I outplayed them. I protected my wife's memory, and I denied them the fruits of their greed. But when the dust settled, the battlefield was empty, and I was the only one left standing, completely alone. Was it worth it? I ask myself that every single day. The truth is, some victories cost more than any defeat. What do you think? Did I do the right thing? Was there another way? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. These stories, these life lessons, are all we have to pass on to one another. If my story made you think, or if you've ever faced a betrayal that tested you to your limits, please give this video a like, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more true stories about the complexities of life. Thank you for listening.